welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, it is a chilly, rainy day outside, so I thought today would be a perfect day for a kitchen video. It has been a while since I have done any canning of meat on our channel, and right now our freezers need to be emptied out a little bit because we're expecting a whole beef to come back from the butcher soon, and in December we have a pig that will be going into the freezer, and so I need to take some things out of the freezer and put them into jars or freeze dry them so that I can make room in the freezer for our cow and a pig. So today on this video, we are going to be canning rabbit meat, which is something that I have never done here with you guys, and I'm really excited to take you guys along on the process. Now, Kevin and I have been raising rabbits for meat for over 10 years now. We absolutely love it. Now, in the past, raising rabbits for meat was pretty unheard of. People didn't really do that much, but it has been increasing in popularity recently because there are so many people who are moving out of the cities and into the country and want to take more responsibility and more control over what they're putting into their bodies and putting into their families' bodies. And so many people have been starting to raise rabbits for meat, and it is fantastic. I'm so happy that more and more people are starting to do that and enjoy that. Normally when we raise rabbits, I freeze them, but I do love to have rabbit meat already in jars in my pantry so that I can just pull it out and add to soups, or we can use them in casseroles. And actually Samantha loves to make like chicken salad, but with rabbit meat, so rabbit salad, and I love to have this meat in the pantry for her. So today we're gonna be doing that. We're gonna go through the whole process. Like with canning all meat, the rabbit meat will be pressure canned, and there are two different ways that you can can rabbit meat, and pretty much all meat. You can either do a raw pack where you put the meat in the jars raw and then pressure can them, or you can do a hot pack where you cook the meat already and then you put the cooked meat into jars and backfill with a liquid and pressure can it that way. I really prefer to can rabbit meat already cooked, so that is what I'm going to be teaching in today's video. I much prefer to roast the rabbits first and pick every single piece of meat off of those bones and then can it hot pack and backfill with rabbit broth. So today we are going to be going through all of those processes, beginning with roasting the rabbits. I'm going to be doing 5 rabbits at one time today. I'm going to be using my 18-quart Nesco roaster, and we will cook it on low, kind of like a big crock pot. We'll be cooking it at a low heat for a long amount of time. And once the meat is perfectly cooked and easy to take off the bone, we'll take them off the bone and go on to the next step. So the 5 rabbits that I will be roasting and canning, I took them out of the freezer a couple days ago and put them in the refrigerator so that they could thaw. Now I'm thinking that they're 100% thawed, but there might be a little still icy in the middle, but it doesn't really matter. The roaster will take care of that. Now, cooking rabbit in a slow cooker is the perfect way because rabbit is so lean that if it's cooked at a too high of a temperature, it will get pretty tough and kind of rubbery and will dry out. Rabbit meat is very similar to chicken breast, where it can easily get too dried out. So this method in a roaster or in a large crock pot is a really great way to cook your rabbit. Now, before we get started, I am going to spray the inside of my roaster just with a little bit of avocado oil. I recently found that the brand Chosen Foods has avocado oil in a spray, and I order it in multiples through Azure Standard. So I'm just gonna spray the bottom of the pan just so that the rabbit meat doesn't stick as it starts cooking. So next up, I'm just gonna take the rabbits out of the plastic that they've been stored in and put them in the roaster, and hopefully we won't have any problems getting all 5 of these into the roaster. You can see their size. They're very good sized rabbits. I thought I was going to be able to get 5 rabbits into this roaster, but I didn't realize how big those rabbits were going to be. So I kept one out and we'll have that for dinner one of these nights coming up. So I've got 4 big rabbits in the roaster. I am going to add 2 cups of water to this roaster just to hopefully keep things from sticking to the bottom, and it will end up being perfectly fine to have that liquid in there because we are going to also make rabbit broth to go along with this in this canning process. The only thing that I'm going to add on the top as far as seasonings right now is salt. I do want the rabbit to just taste like rabbit, so I'm not going to be adding any pepper or garlic and that kind of thing, but I do want to add some salt, and I'm just going to sprinkle some on the top of there. Okay, so we're ready to just roast these rabbits. I'm going to put the lid on my roaster. Now my roaster has various temperatures on it, and I am going to put it at 250 degrees, which is the slow cooker temperature. So I recommend the highest temperature that you would cook a rabbit on, either in a roaster or even in the oven, would be 325 degrees. Because rabbit is so lean, anything faster and anything hotter than that will dry out the meat and it will make it kind of tough. So I am going to be cooking that at 250 degrees. And this will cook basically all day long, and when the meat is just falling off the bones, then we'll come back and we'll pick off all this meat and move on to the next step. Well, all of the rabbits inside of here are done. They've cooked. Now they cooked in here for about 6 hours, and then I turned the heat off for an hour while we ate dinner. And I wanted them to cool off a little bit because we're going to pull all this meat off the bones, and I didn't want to burn my hands at all. So I'm going to start very carefully removing the rabbits one by one out of the roaster and onto this platter. Then I'll take the meat off of the bones, put the meat in this pot right here, and then the bones will go back in to the roaster. Well, that didn't end up going as well as I had hoped, but I do have everything from the first rabbit out of the roaster and onto this platter. And now it really just as easy as taking the meat off of a chicken bone. I'm just going to make sure that there's no bones on the pieces and put them into this pot. Work my way through, it is still really hot. Work my way through this rabbit and then move on to the next. Well, I powered through all 4 of those rabbits, and I got all of the meat into this pot and all of the bones and the broth in this roaster again. We are going to move on to getting this broth set up to cook overnight. But first, I do need to cover this, all of this meat. It's going to go in the refrigerator overnight. And then when we get ready to can it in the morning, I'll bring it back out. So this is going to be put away for now. I'm really pleased with the amount of meat that came off those 4 rabbits. This is about 2/3 of the way full. Now we're going to start working on this broth. Broth is so easy to make. And I really feel like I'm using every bit of the animal, the bones, the little pieces of skin and fat, cartilage that we don't want to save for meat. We can just cook all of the nutrients and a lot of the minerals out of those bones by making broth out of them. Then we're going to use that broth in our jars of canned rabbit. It's just going to be wonderful. So let's get started on that. Now I'll show you about how full this is with bones and stuff like that. We're going to put quite a bit of water in here to start with. Well, I ended up adding 1.5 gallons of water to this roaster. And now we're just gonna add a bunch of things in there. Now, when I make broth, I don't follow a recipe. I just dump a bunch of stuff in here that I know is gonna taste good. And when I was looking for some of my ingredients, I realized that I have a chicken back and neck in the freezer from a time that I parted out a chicken. And I saved those to add to broth, and that's the only one I have, so it's not like I can just, make chicken broth out of this one chicken back. So I normally treat rabbit like poultry, so I'm gonna add that chicken back into the water. And that is going to add even more flavor to the broth. It's gonna be wonderful. So now it's just a matter of a bunch of the other add-ins that I put into my broth. Like I said, I don't really have a recipe. I just start dumping some things in. I always put black peppercorns in. And now a lot of these, or I guess just a couple of these seasonings today I got from Azure Standard in bulk. You can see I buy peppercorns in bulk. I'm gonna put about a tablespoon of black peppercorns in there. These are bay leaves. I'm gonna put probably 4 or so bay leaves. I buy these in bulk too because I just make so much broth within the season while it's cool. I'm gonna add a couple teaspoons of salt. Now, I don't normally add a lot of salt to my broth because I don't want my end recipe to end up too salty. So I'm just gonna add maybe 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt. This is Redmond's real salt. And one of the things that I do a lot when I'm cooking is when I'm using onions. I save everything that I cut off of the onion and that I don't use in my cooking. I save those in freezer bags and I put them in the freezer until I'm making broth, and I put those things in my broth. So I'm not using good onions in my broth. I just use the ends of them, and I keep the skins and put them in the broth as well because the skins, especially of yellow onions, turn your broth a wonderful kind of golden color. And I do want to add enough that the onion parts add some nice flavor. So that's a nice trick to keep all of your ends and skins for broth making. Now, whenever I make broth, I also put a couple stalks of celery in there. So today, I think I'm gonna just add 2 stalks of celery. And I'm going to just rough chop them into pieces that are just a few inches long. Put that in there. Celery flavoring in broth is just so wonderful. And last summer, I grew a lot of celery in the greenhouse actually, and I freeze dried a lot of the celery leaves. Now, the celery leaves do have a similar flavor as the celery itself that we just put in there, but I want to take advantage of some of the things that I preserved for this very purpose, and I'm gonna put maybe a 1/2 cup of freeze-dried celery leaves in there. Now, the last ingredient that we're gonna put in our broth might surprise you a little bit, but I think it's very important. I'm gonna put about a 1/2 cup of apple cider vinegar in there, and really you can use any kind of vinegar that you would like, even white vinegar. Now, vinegar, as you know, is an acid, and the thought process of putting it in your broth, your bone broth, is that the acid will start kind of eating away at those bones and start pulling out some of the minerals that are contained in the bones and infuse that in your broth. And those minerals are so important, so healthy for us. And that is why I'm putting about a 1/2 cup of vinegar in my broth. Now, when I talk about this, sometimes people are worried that you'll be able to taste the vinegar in the broth, but you guys, you won't taste it at all. It will be just fine. Okay, really that's it for the broth preparation. I'm just gonna make sure that's plugged in. It is, and I'm gonna turn it again on 250 degrees, which is like the slow cooker temperature. I'm gonna stir this up, and then I'm gonna let this cook all night long. And in the morning, when we come back and get together to finish this project together, we'll strain it out and heat it up, and it will just be a wonderful liquid base for the rabbit meat that we're going to can together tomorrow. So I'm going to get this going, and we'll see you back tomorrow after chores. Okay guys, I'm back. Let's finish this project. I had such a blessed morning this morning, listening to worship music as I did chores. And then, I had one of those mornings where I was like, well, I need to get to the broth. I need to can this rabbit meat, but before I can do that, I need to do this. And then before I can do that, I need to do this. And so it was kind of a morning filled with things I needed to do before I got to this project, but it is still morning and we are going to finish this project, and I'm so excited to do this with you guys, and I'm so excited to have this in my pantry. Okay, so all night long this broth simmered and it just smelled up the whole house of the most amazing broth. I know Samantha came in here last evening and I was stirring it just like this, lovingly stirring the broth, and she said, "Oh, that smells amazing." And I was so happy about that. So it looks fantastic. And the first thing that we're going to do today is we are going to strain all of these bits out of the broth, and we're going to end up having the broth in this big pot. So we are going to get started straining the bits out of the broth. I like to use one of these kinds of strainers because it gets a lot of the little tiny bits out rather than just using a colander. I'm going to put a spoon in this opening there to make sure that my strainer doesn't fall into all the broth and all the bits go in there, and then I have to start all over again. Not that I've ever done that before. Now, when I have a large volume of broth like this, I don't use a ladle to just, ladle it. It takes forever. I normally start with a large measuring cup like this. We're just going to start dipping all of this and carefully pouring it through the strainer. And it will separate the bits from the broth, and it will be a lovely, lovely thing. Well, now that I am nearing the end of this, and it's not quite as easy to use my measuring cup, I'm going to be daring and just start pouring this right through that. Hopefully I don't make a giant mess. I want to show you all just how beautiful this broth turned out. It's so gorgeous. It smells so amazing. So, okay, let's get this started boiling. It shouldn't take too long. And in the meantime, I'll get my jars out. We'll fill them with the meat and we'll just get that process going. The broth is on the stove, and now it's time to start filling these jars. Now I'm going to be filling these jars, I would say loosely, up to 1 inch from the top of the jar. And you can see that I'm taking some of these bigger pieces that I have here and just breaking them into smaller pieces to put in the jars, just so they aren't just such overwhelming size. I'm not going to be smashing these down in the jars, but I am going to be jiggling them around so that I can get quite a bit in meat in these jars. There will be plenty of space in between these bits of meat for the liquid to go through, and so I am confident that the heat will be able to penetrate through these jars of meat and will can safely. Okay, now we are all set to get started. Let me just go over everything that we're going to be using today. Here is the pressure canner that I'm going to be using. It is, I don't know what model it is, but it's like the shortest Presto pressure canner. It will hold 10 pints. And this is the broth that was brought back up to a boil. I'm using a ladle, a chopstick to get the air bubbles out, this measurer. I always call it a gapper, but I don't really know what it's called. But this will measure how much distance It is between the top of your jar and your food and liquid and stuff. Canning funnel, I have a damp rag that also has some vinegar on it so that it will clean up the edges and take off any grease or oil that's around the rims. I have clean, new canning lids. I have canning rings. Obviously my jar is full of the rabbit meat and a jar lifter. So we're gonna get started here. Now, generally rabbit meat and rabbits don't have a whole lot of fat. It's a pretty lean kind of meat. There is a small layer of fat on top. I'm not gonna worry about that. Oftentimes I'll take the fat off of the top of broth that I'm canning because, really for two reasons. It's not unsafe to have fat on your on the top of your canned goods, but there are two reasons why you may want to remove it. The first reason is over time that oil can become kind of rancid and it doesn't taste very good. The second reason is sometimes oil or fat can kind of accumulate on the rim of your jar during the canning process and it can prevent a good seal. So I'm going to be combating that by wiping the rims with a damp rag that has a little bit of white vinegar on it, and that will help kind of cut the grease. So I am going to be just using my ladle here to stir this up. And I'm going to be filling each jar until it is 1 inch from the top of the jar, or maybe a little underneath that. In this situation, especially with pressure canning, it is better to underfill a tad than to overfill because you don't want a chance for siphoning. I'm using a chopstick here to poke around here just to remove any air bubbles that might be trapped in there. I'm going to double check that it is the right height, and it is. I'm taking my rag and I'm going to wipe very thoroughly the rim of that jar, put on a new clean canning lid, secure that finger tight with a canning ring, and then I'll put that right in my canner. Do the same thing for the second one, and we'll just keep doing this until all 10 of our jars are filled. Here's the last one going in. Now inside this canner, I already have a right amount of water, and I also added a splash of white vinegar to keep those jars nice and clean when they come out. So I'm just adding the top here. And I'm gonna turn on the heat. And I'm gonna let this heat up until we start seeing water vapor or steam coming out this little hole, and then we'll come back. Steam is starting to come out of the top of this canner, so I am going to set a timer for 10 minutes. When 10 minutes is up, we'll put the weight on there. While all of this was going on, I decided, you know, I have this broth here and it's ready, so I decided that while all this is going on, I might as well just start the canning process with this broth. So I have brought this up to a boil and it's ready for me to get into the jars and get that into my other canner. So I'll have 2 canners going on the stovetop at one time. Now with the broth, I'm not going to use a ladle at all. It just takes too much time, but I can lift this and pour it in. We're also going to be pouring this to 1 inch to the top of the jar. Again, I'm using a clean new lid and a canning ring. I'm going to carefully put the top on this one. Get that going. The small canner has been venting now for 10 minutes, so now it's time to put the weight on top of there. Now, generally, you'll use a weight like this that has different rings on it that goes on top of there. We will need In general, you'll use 10 pounds of pressure, but because of our elevation, we need to use 15 pounds of pressure when we're canning, when we're pressure canning. So this weight alone is 5 pounds of pressure. If you add one ring on top of that, that makes 10 pounds of pressure. When you add the second ring on top of that, that's 15 pounds of pressure. So now I'll put the weight on. I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit. We're waiting for that to come up just like that. And when this weight starts rocking back and forth, we can set our time to allow these cans in here to process. Our weight is rocking back and forth, so we can set our timer now for processing. Generally, anything that you are canning that has meat in it, you will process pints for 75 minutes and quarts for 90 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer for 75 minutes for this to be done. Our broth over here isn't quite ready to put the weight on there, but when the time comes and when it reaches 15 pounds of pressure, broth needs to process for 25 minutes for quarts, which is what we have in here, or 20 minutes for pints. And that's pretty standard for any kind of broth that you are canning. Okay, our timer has gone off, and we can turn off the heat. Now what we're looking for is for the pressure inside of this canner to come all the way down to 0. We'll know that it has reached 0 because this will go back down. After it goes back down, we're going to wait probably 10 minutes for things to calm down a little bit even more inside of there, and we're going to remove the weight. At that point, we can take the lid off and unload the canner. Well, that is a good project done. 5 total rabbits out of the freezer to make room for other things. 4 of those rabbits we cooked up and canned into 10 pint jars, and then we made some homemade broth from the bones and the bits, and it just turned out wonderfully. You guys, if you're enjoying videos like this, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, and remember, the best thing that you can do to help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.